Hello, my name is Guillaume Petersen, so I'm working with George on Theme 3 of the PICS project, which looks at financing policy options. So I'm a UBC PhD candidate at the Institute for Resources, Environment and Sustainability. What I'm going to talk about today is the PICS engagement project, which is part of all of this big project. So we decided that we had to talk with people around BC to see what they think of all of these different alternatives and also the policy gaps that we see. There's many policy gaps. So what can we do to go forward and really use all the opportunities that are in the forest? So the point of the PICS engagement process is really to see where carbon fits within the whole spectrum of values that we use to manage the forest in BC. So carbon is one of them, but there's many others. And so today we really looked at carbon and some socioeconomic, but there's many other values that we need to consider also when we look at these opportunities and alternatives. So the project, the engagement process is separated into 3 phases. So first phase, which we did last year, was a first series of workshops with the stakeholders and First Nations around the province to define objectives for managing the forest. So what are important things to consider when we develop those mitigation alternatives? And I'll go more in details into them. Second phase was actually the developing of the alternatives, which we saw with all the presentations this morning. And then the phase 3, which is going on now, is a second series of workshops, and we also did a public survey to get a sense of what people think of these alternatives and how we can improve them. So the first phase, we went to 4 regions. We did 2 workshops here in Vancouver, one in Nanaimo, one in Kamloops, and one in Prince George. That was at the beginning of 2016. So we had a very, very diverse group of participants. So NGOs were very well represented, many environmental NGOs, development NGOs, also tourism. We had a lot of small-scale forestry representatives, so consultants, a lot of community forests also, and also big industry, some First Nations, some people from academia, and carbon offset companies, and local regional government. We purposefully did not invite the federal or provincial government to keep the process really focused on stakeholders and First Nations. So what we did during that first phase is to identify objectives. So the definition of what we gave as an objective is really simple, is what really matters when we think about climate change mitigation in the forest sector. So we identified many objectives. So in the 5 workshops, we had over 30. The team got together and we looked at these objectives, tried to put them together. The things that were similar were bumped together. We have sub-objectives that define what is an objective. So I'll go over them quickly. So the first 4 are really the ecological or environmental focus. So the first one, which is not a surprise, is to maximize climate change mitigation by reducing emissions or increasing removals. The second one is climate change adaptation, which is also very important, especially now with the impact that we're seeing on our forests on climate change. And the 2 others, they're really ecosystem services that are co-benefits from also managing for carbon. Biodiversity was separated because many people thought it was important to have it separately, and especially for old growth forests, and especially on the coast. And for ecosystem services, they put together all the other very important services that we get from the forest, so soil quality, air quality, and also recreational, spiritual opportunities. The next 6 strategies are really more social and economic oriented. The first 2 are associated with First Nations. So the first one is really a given, and it's to recognize First Nation rights and claims to their forest land, which everybody agreed that should be on that list. The second one was to increase, particularly for the First Nation, their economic opportunities and role in the forest and forest sector. And then increase provincial net economic benefit. So that's really industry competitiveness and value-added products. Increase socioeconomic benefit, which is basically employment. And then the last 2 is resilience of local communities. So really focus on providing them with opportunities, and not only the big forest companies, and also minimize the negative impacts on local food security, which is a bit surprising and comes mostly from Prince George, where there's a lot of afforestation projects which they take agricultural land and transfer them into forests. So that was an issue there. And the last two are more on the process side, so ensure evidence-based decision-making, both the science but also traditional knowledge, and the social license and political feasibility of these alternatives. So we also asked the respondents after the workshops to rank these alternatives. And so this is the ranking from 1 to 9. This was ranked by approximately 70% of all the participants of these workshops. So the most important, which is not necessarily surprising, is the environmental benefits. So ecosystem services came first, then the climate change mitigation, biodiversity came very up the list. And the lower one are the economic incentives and benefits. So now phase 2. So you saw the 5 strategies. We're going into the, so we had development and modeling. I won't go into details into these strategies because we already talked about this morning. We added a 6th strategy, which is rehabilitation. The reason we did that is that it's going to play, and it was identified as a very important role in the climate action, climate leadership plan. And so we added it to have an idea of what stakeholders think of this strategy. And we're working now on modeling the impacts of this strategy. So also the output of the modeling, so we went over this. So there's biophysical, economic, and socioeconomic outputs. So now, what we're doing now, and we actually had a workshop yesterday in Nanaimo, so we're going to the same communities again, and this time we're going to ask participants to evaluate the 6 strategies based on the objectives that were identified during the phase 1. So yesterday was very productive. We had good discussions, a lot of agreements, which is very nice and surprising. So there's a document that we created for this consultation process. There's some copies outside, I think. So it really goes over all of the strategies, all of the process from phase 1 to phase 3, and what's in the next phase, and what's the goal of this process. And they also define the 12 objectives that were identified. So another part of this project was a public survey that was sent out in January to the general public, so 1,500 people. And we asked them to identify the support for these 6 strategies. We had a lot of questions. I won't go in detail in the results, and they're going to be published soon. But so we have the 6 strategies, and the 2 in red are 2 that we added. So increased growth rate, which is using fertilizers or increased seeds or other ways to make trees have better growth rate, and also increased harvest. So it's to actually increase the area we harvest per year. And we asked the public to indicate their level of either support or of opposition to these strategies. And there's a broad level of support for most of these strategies. In the average, all of the strategies were supported, although increased harvest was really on the limit of not being supported, which is not necessarily surprising. The strategies that were the most supported is rehabilitation, which is all over the place. People saw the impact of the mountain pine beetle, and they want to take actions towards that. And also old growth conservation is really on the top of the list of what people want to see. And all of the other strategies that are enhanced forest management are also very supported. And people realize that these strategies are not necessarily an intensive forest management, but it's really to improve our management. We also looked at the survey at other results. So what affects these level of supports? What are the characteristics of why people would support or not? But I won't go into details on this. Just as a conclusion, so there's an overall agreement on a set of objectives. People were agreed on it. They did not necessarily agree on what's more important, but we know that what we should look at when we develop management strategies. The most important are environmental ones, ecosystem services particularly. So the incoming workshops, and anybody that wants to participate, you're welcome to. In Vancouver, it's going to be in June 8th, so just contact me. So we're going to evaluate those strategies. And for the survey, in general, there's a high level of support and a broad level of support for any of the mitigation strategies we asked about. And there's multiple variables, as I said, that can predict public support. Environmental values, which is not very surprising. Perceptions towards climate change. So if someone perceives risk, they're going to be more supportive of mitigation strategies. Trust in decision makers was really a big factor. Prioritized objectives. If you support conservation, there's some strategies you're going to prefer over others. And then socio-demographic, political view in particular. So this is all about it, so thank you very much.